My opponent plays b3, and so now I'm going to play the pawn to d5. He's playing what's called the Larsen opening, and he's playing very fast. You see, he plays bishop b2. That's the idea of the Larsen opening, to be able to place the bishop on the long dark diagonal. I'm going to play the pawn to c5, and then I hope to play knight c6, followed by the push to e5. But now he quickly plays the pawn to c4. He's attacking my pawn on d5. Well, I'll defend it with the knight on f6. I know he can double my pawns by taking my knight, but will he do it? I don't think so. If he's put so much effort into placing his bishop on the long diagonal, I don't think it's just to take my knight on f6. And so here, if I retake with the queen on d5, my queen will get chased away by knight c3. So I'm going to retake with the knight. He plays the knight to c3, attacking my knight. Well, my knight is protected, so I'll be able to play knight c6. And he plays e4. So he's playing very fast, and he's an aggressive player. He likes to attack, to take. He likes quick decisions. So in this position, I'm going to stay rather calm. My knight is under attack. Yes, that's true, but this pawn push to f4 has just weakened squares in his camp, because the d file is a semi-open file. Semi-open for me. I have no pawn, so I'm the one with influence on this file who has space, and the d4 and d3 squares have just been weakened, because the e-pawn was the only pawn capable of defending the d3 and d4 squares. But since it moves to e4 to attack my knight, those squares are no longer defended. And so I can look to play knight b4 or knight f4 to try and get into d3. Knight f4, why not? It attacks the g2 pawn, so it also prevents the bishop from developing. And then it leaves the b4 square for the other knight, why not? It can sometimes land on d3. My opponent plays queen f3. So now I can't get into d3 because he has double control over that square. And besides, he's attacking my knight. So I'm going to play the pawn to f5. Or else I go back with my knight to e6 and use the d4 square. That interests me too. That's what I'm going to do, actually. Knight to a6. And you see I have many squares. The d4 square and the b4 square too, which is a fork square. You see, my knights can find some very, very nice squares. Advancing pawns or exchanging them is not a trivial decision. It can be very critical. It can make you lose control of very important squares. He plays the pawn to d3. Now, there are plenty of moves that interest me. Knight e5, knight d4, knight b4, the other knight to d4. I admit I don't even know what to play anymore, as all the moves are interesting. I'll put this knight on d4. It seems natural to free the bishop and the pawn. So he goes back to d1. There was that threat of a fork on c2. And I'm going to play g6. Why not? I'm also going to put my bishop on the long diagonal to oppose his. He plays knight to e2. And now watch what I'm going to do. I'll play bishop to g4. I know very well he'll play f3, and my bishop will simply move back. But I want to provoke that f3 move to weaken the dark squares around his king, weakening the e3 square, the diagonal, and his future kingside rook. So bishop to g4. So he plays f3, and now I'm going to retreat my bishop. Not to h5, though, because then g4 comes and my bishop gets trapped, but to other squares. Maybe even e6. No, I think I should retreat to c8. I'm going back to c8. You might think I've lost a tempo, except that my bishop can reposition, but his pawn on f3 can never move back. So the weakness just created is permanent. He plays knight to a4. He wants to take my knight there, but of course I'll play bishop to g7. I'm also looking at queen to a5 check. After queen to a5, he can play queen to d2. There's not much follow-up, I don't think. So I'll play bishop to g7. And if he takes my knight, I can recapture with the bishop or the queen and have total control of the dark squares, since all those pawns are fixed on light squares. He plays rook to b1. And since I want to dominate the dark squares, I'll play bishop to d7 to exchange my light squared bishop for his knight. That way I'll have two minor pieces to play on the dark squares. But he plays knight takes c5. He played that a bit fast. He didn't see queen to a5, which was a fork. So his king is too exposed and the dark squares are too open. So queen to a5 and he loses the piece. Be very careful before taking pawns that could leave your pieces exposed on unprotected squares, especially if your king is still vulnerable, as was the case here. So he plays queen to d2, and now I'll take his knight, but always check if there's something better. But I don't see anything better here, so I'll take it. He plays rook to c1, attacking my queen. So where should I put my queen? Probably on d6. So he just played bishop to e2. I can do kingside castling or play a move like queen to b6. Maybe I should have gone to b6 actually, because now if he castles kingside, you see he'll suffer from the open diagonal to his king, and my knight can move with checks. I ultimately regret not putting my queen on b6, which was the logical choice given that I had provoked the f3 move. Well, I'll play it now. It's never too late to admit your mistakes. I should have put my queen on b6 instead of d6. So now he can't castle kingside. Otherwise, I'll play knight takes bishop, for example, with a double check on his king, or after kingside castling, knight takes f3 instead, with a double check on his king and a royal fork, the knight attacking the queen. It's a nightmare. And if he doesn't castle kingside, I can castle kingside myself and connect my rooks. So he plays rook to c4, and here I can play bishop b5. But he'll play rook b4 maybe to pin my bishop, but there's the push to a5, so it's all working out well. All right, I'm playing bishop b5. He plays rook b4 as expected. The push to a5, and now his rook has no squares. So he takes on d4, I take back with the bishop, and he'll have to give up the rook for a bishop, so I'm planning to give it for the dark squared bishop. But I'm up a rook now. I'm threatening queen a1 check, he still can't castling. So he plays the queen to d1, I'll just do kingside castling quietly, and I'll connect my rooks. And you see the consequences of this f3 push, it's dramatic for him. He can't to castle. I'll put another rook on the d file, triple the attacks on d3, and now even put a rook on the c file. He comes here, I'll play rook c3, we're going to take all the best squares. All right, we take on d3, it forces the exchange of his light squared bishop, which wasn't doing much, but it gives me infiltration routes. Now rook d2 is a threat. So rook d2 check, and we'll try to go mate his king quickly. We'll threaten to take on h2. He could still escape to g4. That's why I'm thinking of playing h5 first. Queen g2 is very interesting, but I'm playing h5 to threaten queen g2. So he plays queen c1, so queen g2. He can still escape, but we'll play queen g2 anyway. Then take the pawn on f3. Now I'm threatening queen g4 mate. He has to go back to h3. He doesn't, and it's mate. All right, I have white. I'll start this time with the pawn on d4, the queen's pawn. My opponent plays knight f6, and I play c4. Why? So that the c-pawn can oppose his future d5 push. And now I play knight c3, and I'm planning to play e4. Except he just played bishop b4, and so he pins my knight. And I can't get to this d4 push, otherwise he just takes the pawn on d4. So in the position, I'll settle for the move e3. I'm not afraid of him taking. It's true that by taking, he doubles my pawns, but I'll get the dark squared bishop. I'll have the bishop pair. I'll have to use my dark squared bishop. And that's why, by the way, I play bishop d3 to be able to play e4 and free the dark squared bishop. My opponent plays rook e8. I'll play knight to e2 here. Well, why not? That way, if he takes, I can even take back with the knight, and I won't have doubled pawns. And my opponent plays c5. Well, I'm going to do kingside castling. There, I've finished developing my kingside, but I must admit I haven't gained anything in the position. My opponent has a solid position he's developing as well. So he takes on d4. Now if I take back with the knight, this time he'll be able to double my pawns. I'll have doubled pawns. On the other hand, I'll have the black square bishop. And it's up to me to show that I have play on the dark squares, which isn't necessarily obvious. Otherwise, I can take back with the pawn. That way, if he takes, I can take back with the knight, and I don't have doubled pawns. But when I take back with the pawn, there could be this d5 push. Why am I talking about this d5 push? Because exchanging the d5 pawns for the c4 pawn will create what's called an isolated pawn on d4, meaning a pawn that no longer has protection from other pawns. And you see, I'm very careful about what pawn structure I set up in this opening. Because if you set up a bad pawn structure, you risk paying for it later in the middle game. In fact, the opening isn't just about developing pieces, it's about setting up the pawn structure or the imbalances that will play later in the middle game. Well, you know what? I'm going to take back with the knight and let him take my knight on c3 and double my pawns on the c-file. I'll have a bad pawn structure, but the imbalance I plan to exploit in the middle game is my dark squared bishop, since he won't have one anymore. And I had a few ideas for playing on the dark squares, especially on the d6 square. But he didn't take, he played knight to c6. So here, if I take, it'll strengthen his pawn structure. I'm looking at knight b5. I'm going to play knight b5. If he takes, I can easily take back with the knight now, and I won't have any pawn weaknesses. And I'll look to play a 3. I'd like his bishop to retreat to a 5, for example, to give me the d6 square. You see how much attention I paid to the pawn structure. I look at isolated pawns, doubled pawns. I look at weak squares. Here, the d6 square, a weak square, is a square in the opponent's camp that the opponent can no longer defend with a pawn. Now, sometimes it's not a big deal because he defends it with pieces, but if he can't defend it with pieces, you might be able to occupy this square to your advantage. And so he retreats preemptively to f8. Interesting. And now I'm going to play e4. Why? Simply to defuse his d5 push? He plays e5 himself. What kind of move is that? That move is a real head-scratcher. Ah, that's not a good move. Because the e-pawn is the only pawn capable of defending the squares on the semi-open d-file. This semi-open, half-open file is in my favor. True, I don't have a pawn, but as a result, I have influence with my pieces and I have space control. And so, when this pawn advances, it gives up the d5 square to me. I can use this d5 square. Now the knight defends this square. But I'm even looking at bishop g5 to pin this knight and then occupy the square. I think I'll play it like that. There is one drawback to my strategy, though, which is that I'm also giving up control of the d4 square. Maybe that's why he did it. He plays h6. He wants me to give up my dark squared bishop. But if he takes back with the queen, he still gets a fork on c7. He'll lose the exchange. He'll even lose the piece. Both rooks are unprotected afterwards, so he's going to have to take back with the pawn. That weakens his pawn structure. So I take his knight. Now his pawn structure is getting ruined, because if he takes back with the pawn, he has doubled pawns here, an isolated pawn here, weak squares here, and a backward isolated pawn on d7. All the squares are weak. I'm going to have fun. He's shielding his king, which also weakens things. He takes back with the queen, so he's choosing the fork. I'm also looking, I could play knight d5 to attack the queen, but that lets him retreat. But I still have the fork afterwards with my two knights, you know. But I prefer to go for the fork right away on c7. Now, it's hard to advise my opponent at this point because the material loss is going to be terrible. Losing a rook without any compensation is just awful, especially since afterwards I have a second knight that can exploit the d5 square. So my opponent has retreated to d8 with his queen, so I'm going to take the rook here. He might want to push the pawn, move the bishop to trap the knight, which won't be able to exit via c7 since the queen controls it. And so in that case, I won't be winning a rook, just the quality, meaning I'll have traded my knight for the rook. But I have this knight that can come to d5 to ensure the other knights escape. See the consequences of weakening the squares on the d-file and that e5 pawn push. It's terrible. Look, I'm coming out while attacking the rook. The rook has no squares. If it goes to e7, the knight attacks it, and the knight controls the other square. And in the end, I'm going to take both rooks. It's a total catastrophe. I feel bad for my opponent, but I hope this game will be useful for him to understand what a semi-open file is, to understand the importance of controlling squares on a semi-open file and preventing piece infiltrations like this. And there it is. He resigns, of course. So the game of chess isn't just about attacking kings. Yes, of course, the ultimate goal is always the attack on the king, but there are intermediate steps. Positional play is precisely about understanding these intermediate steps and trying to create poor pawn structures for the opponent to create weak pawns, isolated pawns, backward pawns, and weaknesses of squares that you can invest in, dominate, and finally excel, leading to the opponent's material losses or checkmating attacks. All right, I have white and I'm going to play the pawn to d4. My opponent plays d5, I play c4. My opponent plays knight to f6, and that's not a good way to defend the pawn. He should have defended with the c6 pawn or the e6 pawn to be able to take back with a pawn, because here I take on d5. He can't take back with a pawn. So he takes back with the knight, but the knight, it's going to get chased away by the e4 push. That's why he needed a pawn on d5. If he had taken back with the queen, I would have chased his queen away with knight c3. But here I'm chasing his knight with the e4 push and establishing a duo of pawns. He's attacking my pawn. I don't want to play e5. I'll give him the d5 square. I'm playing knight c3. And so now I have the center with the knight defending. Now he's freeing the bishop of dark squares to come and attack my knight and renew the threats against the e4 pawn. But I'm going to play bishop d3. I'm not afraid of queen takes d4 because of bishop b5 check, and I pick up his queen. He plays bishop e7. And so knight to f3, he's going to do kingside castling very quickly. And here, there's an attack that doesn't work in this position, but it's interesting. It's the Gioacchino-Greco attack. Look at this attack. It consists of playing e5, chasing the black knight, sacrificing the bishop on h7, and then following up with knight g5 check, then the arrival of the queen, and having a queen and knight tandem attacking to mate the king. But here it doesn't work. Why? Because he has the bishop on e7. On e5, he moves his knight. Bishop takes h7 check, king takes, knight g5 check, he'll take me. So here I'm going to insert the move h4. And now it threatens e5, the knight moves, bishop takes, king takes, knight g5 check. And if he takes, the pawn can retake, freeing the rook that attacks the king and the queen that's coming. So I needed the pawn on h4. And so we send e5, that's it, the attack will work. So he goes to d5, but bishop takes h7 check as planned. Now he doesn't have to take the bishop, but then I would have won an important pawn. In fact, he doesn't take it. It's a shame. I would have liked to show you the attack, but you understood, right? If he took the bishop, knight g5 check, and then the arrival of the queen. And if he takes my knight at any time, the pawn retakes and it frees the rook. So he didn't take. Well, what are we going to do? I'm still thinking about playing knight g5, actually, for the arrival of the queen on h5, you know. Knight g5, if he takes, pawn retakes, it still opens the file for my rook, right? I'm going to play knight g5 anyway, in the end. I'm threatening the arrival of the queen. He can play g6. Well, he takes c3, he attacks my queen. I'm not even going to take the knight back. I'm going to play queen h5. Now, I'm putting everything on his king. Now on g6, bishop takes check, the queen attacks. And then queen h7 mate, supported by the bishop and the knight. So he takes. So I can retake with the pawn. That was the idea, to open the file, but now I simply have bishop g6 check. Oh no, that doesn't work. Bishop g6 check. He can bring his bishop back to h6 to try to close it. Even if I can take afterwards, it doesn't work very well. So I'm going to retake with the pawn anyway. And then that was the idea of this pawn on h4. It was to allow the opening of the file. And now it's terrible for him because there are a lot of pieces on the file. Only he has his king on h8 at the back of the pack, and he's the one who's going to get caught. Queen takes d4. So now just move the bishop, even to g8. Actually, I can offer him the bishop since afterwards I have mate on h7 or h8. And we're going to go all the way to the end of the file where his king was, by the way. All right, my opponent plays the pawn to e4, and I'm going to play d6, what's called the Pirc defense, which consists of preventing the pawn from advancing to then attack it with the knight. So he's going to come and defend it. He plays d3. Well, and since the diagonal is blocked for the bishop on f8 because of the e7 and d6 pawns, in the Pirc defense, we usually play g6 to place the bishop on the long, dark diagonal. He plays bishop to f4, and I'm going to play bishop g7. As soon as my knight moves now, it attacks the b2 pawn. So maybe he'll play c3 anyway. And there it is. He plays c3. And now what am I going to play? Well, I don't really know. I don't really have an attacking move in his position. I'm going to play c5. I'm using the wing pawn to control this d4 square a bit. But he played knight d2. He'll be able to play d4 because the knight on d2 now protects the e4 pawn, you see. So he could play d4 and recapture after the trade. He'll have a strong pawn center in the end. Maybe I'll play bishop g4, pinning his knight to try and hinder the d4 push. But I think I have a little time anyway. I'm going to do kingside castling. I'm not sure he really wants to play d4 in this position, otherwise he might have played d4 from the start of the game. He had played d3. I don't think he really wants to play d4. So I preferred to catch up on some development. But that was maybe a purely psychological move. Besides, he's playing g3, you see? I find this g3 move a bit dubious. I think there was better to do, but after all, why not? Well, I'll develop my knight to c6. So he plays bishop g2. He's ready to do kingside castling. And now what am I going to do? The problem is that he's really going to end up playing d4 against me. Pawn takes, and he'll have a better center, and I don't know how to prevent that. Maybe still with bishop g4. That way on d4, the knight can't protect the d4 pawn because of the queen behind it, so I could start taking on d4. On the other hand, he's going to play h3. But if he plays h3, I take his knight, I give him the bishop pair, it's true. So I'll have to be very careful with his bishop on the white square. But on the other hand, he can no longer play d4 because he loses the pawn on e4. But I have to play on the dark square. He has the pair of bishops. It's still an advantage for him, the pair of bishops. If he manages to activate his white square bishop, I'll have problems. So I have to manage to fight on the dark squares, but how to do it? What moves do I have on the dark squares? Queen b6 to attack b2, but he'll protect with rook b1. It doesn't go far, it's not going to achieve much. Well, I'm going to play rook b8. The idea is maybe to push the b pawn with b5, b4 to attack a bit and weaken this position. However, watch out, my knight will be undefended after the b5 push and facing his light-squared bishop exactly. That's the problem with my position, but I don't think he can really take advantage of it, so I play b5. Because the diagonal is still blocked up. And I'm keeping an eye on that. I know it could be a problem. Now he plays rook e1. I think he's going for the e5 push. But that will allow me to exchange my knight. I play b4. I'm starting a conflict on c3. I want to open the long dark diagonal. He plays rook b1. And so now I'm thinking of queen f5. I'm attacking c3 twice. I'm attacking a 2. He takes b4, and now many moves interest me. Recapturing with the queen, the knight, or the rook. Almost all recaptures interest me, you know. Oh, wait, I can't recapture with the rook because of bishop to d2, the pin. Knight takes. There could be bishop to d2, but that's less serious. My queen has time to move away, maybe even by taking the pawn on a 2. Otherwise, I can also recapture with the queen, right? Listen, I'm going to recapture with the queen on b4. It might not be the right recapture, but I know the knight on c6 is undefended. I have to keep that in mind constantly. And how can he take advantage of it? For now, I don't see how. He plays b3, so he's completely opened the dark diagonal for me, but it lacks a target, of course. Now, I'm thinking about knight to d4, maybe to provoke a knight exchange, or knight to d7. My knight, anyway, on f6 isn't doing anything. So I'm going to play knight to d7. And I have these 2 knights plus the bishop that can play on quite a few dark squares. So my goal is to dominate the dark squares and ensure his white square bishop has no impact. I say it often, but that's the only important thing to understand in this position. In reality, strategically, that's all there is to understand. It's the main imbalance of the position. You have to understand it. You must constantly choose your moves based on this imbalance. So bishop to d2 is played. And you see, when fighting against the bishop pair, well, it's also interesting to break the opponent's bishop pair. Meaning that here, I'm interested in bishop to c3. It might seem very surprising, but I'm interested in this move. Why? Because after bishop takes, queen takes, the opponent will no longer have the pair of bishops. He'll only have the light-squared bishop, whereas I'll have 2 knights to play on the dark squares against only 1 to defend them. His white square bishop is restricted, and my knights can be active. Now, after bishop to c3, I have to watch out for a 3. He wants to deflect my queen to win the bishop. I can retreat to a 5 or b4, but I could take, he takes, and I could take again, and it's fine. So I'm going to play bishop to c3. I'm coming in to break his pair of bishops. And I'll show you, because I'm looking to play a queen and knight tandem on the dark squares against a queen and light squared bishop. How to achieve that? I exchange the dark squared bishops, then I exchange 1 knight for his. And then I leave him with the inactive light-squared bishop, while my other knight works closely with my queen to play on both colors, especially the dark squares, since his bishop can't defend them. In this context, his 2 most important pawns will be the f2 and g3 pawns, the only 2 pawns still defending the dark squares in his position. Because most of his pawns on the queen side and in the center, in fact all of them, are on white squares, which gives me access to the dark squares. So he plays queen to c2. I take his bishop. He recaptures. All right, let's occupy this square first. He might play queen to c4, offering a queen exchange, but no, he'd lose the knight. He can't play that. So he comes here. Now I have knight to f5 with the threat of knight to d3, a new fork. That's interesting. And do you see his white square bishop that hasn't done anything for a while? I told you so. Look at how my knights are positioning themselves in the game now. So the threat is knight takes d3. If he plays bishop to f1 to defend, knight to f3 check, knight takes back, king rook fork. He plays knight to c4. And here I can play knight takes d3 and make the fork. But I can also do what I wanted to tell you earlier. Exchange the knights and play a queen and knight tandem against a queen and light squared bishop. But in this position, of course, I prefer knight takes d3. I still need to play fast because I'm talking a lot, but I have to play faster. So I wanted to exchange the knights to play a queen and knight tandem against the queen and white square bishop. Here he gave me the opportunity to win the exchange, so I'm going to do it. The exchange is the trade of the knight here for his rook. He played queen to d2. I take first, then I take his rook. He takes back. I play a 5. I'll look to play a 4, do a little minority attack here to break his pawn structure on the queen side. He plays that. I send a 4. I give up a pawn, but I open the files for my rooks and break his pawn structure a bit. There I enter. Oh, I can't enter on b2, right? So I enter on b4. I attack both the fork. Then I take the l4 pawn and the pawn on a 2. I'm always alert to all the fork my knight could make, you know. If his rook moves, there will be checks on it too. We have to watch out. Now both rooks on the a-file. There we go. Knight to b3 was also possible, right? On pawn takes, I would take his rook with check. Here I take. I take back. The f2 pawn is under attack. And here he cracks. He leaves me many pieces. I'm threatening knight to f3 check, but he'll have king to h1, and I don't necessarily have a follow-up. That's a shame. I'll play rook here. I attack his knight. Knight to f3 check, king to h1, and then I'll have the check. You see, king to h1, rook check, bishop takes, rook takes check. Afterwards, he'll come to g2 to fork me, but my knight can come to d2 to protect my rook. See, here he comes to g2. He's going to make the fork. Knight to d2, I protect. And now he might resign because with a rook down, plus this passed pawn that just wants to become a queen. But no, he's not resigning. I play c4. I know he can take on d6. It's not a big deal. I take back. I'm not going to let him make a queen after all. And now he's going to have to run to catch the c-pawn. And he resigns, of course, in this position. So look at the strategic concept. It's in this position that he cracks, but I want to explain the strategic concept to you. I play knight to e5. I have both knights to play on the dark squares. He has the white square bishop. He only has one knight to compete with my knights on the dark squares. So I'll inevitably dominate the dark squares. Here he cracks because he leaves me the d3 pawn by playing knight c4 too quickly. He should have played rook e3. And if, for example, I play a 5 and he plays knight c4, I exchange a pair of knights. He can't retake with the b pawn because of the open file, so he'll retake with the d pawn. And for example, I play e5. And in this position, his light squared bishop is very passive while my knight is impregnable and very active. It's radiating in the center, protected by the double pawns. Who can dislodge this knight? He has no pawn to dislodge it, no knight, no dark squared bishop. He might sacrifice the exchange, but even if at some point he sacrifices the rook for the knight, well, I ended up winning the exchange in the game, but I retake with a pawn, and I'd even have a passed pawn, protected by the other pawn. And that's the strategic concept I was looking for when I played knight e5. And that's what I can teach you. Tactical training is essential, of course. Knowing how to calculate and combine is vital. But you can practice that on any gaming platform. On all gaming platforms, there are tactical exercises that allow you to practice. And it's actually quite easy to understand because even if you make a mistake, the penalty for a tactical error is very immediate. It's not far off in time, meaning you make a tactical error in placement and then in 2 or 3 moves, or even faster, you lose a piece or there's a mate. But for strategy, it's different because a strategic mistake can cost you 10 moves later. The penalty might come 10 moves later. And so it's very far off in time. The penalty is far removed from the strategic error. And that's exactly where you need teachers to explain that to you. And that's what I try to do for you in the games. I try to explain why I exchanged this or that piece, what my strategy is in controlling certain colors, which will eventually lead to a tactical penalty. So practice calculating tactics on the gaming sites. Gain experience by playing games, of course, and by working on your openings. And for the strategic side, watch my videos because that's where I can teach you the most and help you progress in understanding the game. And a little advertising doesn't hurt. Know that in my online chess club, where I give lessons every week, I work a lot on this understanding of the game with exercises from Grandmaster games, but also games from club members, where I'll focus on critical moments, moments where you can unbalance a position and also try to establish plans. Sometimes you bring out all your pieces in the opening and you say, but actually, what should I do? And so the idea is precisely to be able to understand the mechanisms that allow you to establish plans. Well, if you liked the video, give me a thumbs up, leave comments, share it, support the channel, and we'll meet again soon for new adventures on the chessboard. Goodbye, everyone.